Chapter 25. Isabella fired 3 rapid shots into Viktor's chest, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, the flash of muscle fire temporarily blinding her in the darkness. The silver bullets tore into him, parting fur and flesh with vicious efficiency, leaving smoking entry wounds. Each impact forced a guttural howl from his throat that seemed to shake the metal walkways, the sound more felt than heard, vibrating in her bones. He staggered backward, massive body suddenly uncoordinated, clawed hands clutching at the wounds as wisps of smoke curled from the entry points, carrying the sickening smell of burning fur and flesh. Silver! He snarled, hatred contorting his already monstrous features into something beyond nightmare. The word emerged as a broken snarl, but the aristocratic contempt remained intact, even through his transformation. Centuries of breeding evident even in bestial form. Coward's weapon! Isabella scrambled to her feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in her ribs and the warm trickle of blood from her scraped palms. She kept the gun trained on him, widening her stance for stability on the blood-slick catwalk. An otherworldly calm settled over her, the same focused determination that had helped her win impossible cases, a mental state where emotions receded and only tactical clarity remained. Says the man who sends others to do his killing. Viktor's lips pulled back in a grotesque approximation of a smile, revealing rows of yellowed fangs that gleamed with saliva in the moonlight. Not all of it. He lunged forward with supernatural speed, faster than Isabella anticipated. Despite his wounds, his claws leaving trails in the air like heat shimmer. She fired again, the recoil jarring her injured ribs, the bullet grazing his shoulder, tearing away a chunk of flesh and fur that fell to the catwalk with a wet plop. The injury barely slowed his momentum as he barreled towards her, a freight train of muscle and rage. His claws slashed across her forearm as she raised it defensively, tearing through fabric and skin with minimal resistance. Pain blazed along her nerves like liquid fire, hot blood immediately soaking her sleeve and running down to her fingertips in warm rivulets. The coppery smell of her blood filled her nostrils, mingling with Viktor's more animal scent in a nauseating cocktail. "Isabella!" Mikhail's voice called from behind her, strained with pain and urgency, hoarse from fighting. She risked a glance back. Mikhail had regained his footing, but was severely wounded, blood soaking his torn clothing until more was red than not. His left arm hung useless at his side, white bone visible through mangled flesh. But his eyes burned with determination as he began moving toward them. Blue irises almost entirely consumed by that supernatural glow, like sapphires backlit by flame. The slight limp in his gait, the way he favored his left side. Physical, tales that spoke of agony being purposefully ignored. Viktor used her momentary distraction, closing the distance between them, a blur of silver-grey fur and malevolent intent. His massive hand closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet with terrifying ease, claws pricking the sensitive skin of her neck. Isabella kicked and struggled, but it was like fighting a steel vice, her feet dangling uselessly a foot above the catwalk. She managed to fire her gun once more, the bullet embedding somewhere in Viktor's bulk, without slowing him, the report strangely muffled as her oxygen began to deplete. "Perhaps I should show you exactly what my nephew has been hiding from you," Viktor hissed, his fetid breath washing over her face as he squeezed, cutting off her air. "When an alpha wolf takes a human mate, Their life forces become entangled. Harm one, harm both. His claws tightened, pricking Isabella's skin. Warm blood trickled down her neck, contrasting sharply with the cold rain. His family knew better than to permit such a vulnerability. Despite the pressure on her windpipe, Isabella managed to smile. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as she bit the inside of her cheek. And yet, here you are. Using me as leverage. She wheezed the words out. Seems like he was right. About you all along. Rage contorted Viktor's features. The rain seemed to sizzle as it hit his face, now flushed dark with anger. You understand nothing. I understand. That you're terrified of what he's become. Isabella forced the words out past the crushing pressure on her throat. Her vision began to dim around the edges, the world constricting to a tunnel with Viktor's snarling face at its center. Something you could never be. Black spots danced at the edges of Isabella's vision as her lungs burned for oxygen, throat crushed in his implacable grip. The world began to dim around her, colors fading, sounds becoming distant. She saw Mikhail charging toward them through a dimming sight, his transformation completing as rage and desperation fueled his shift. His broken arm twisted and realigned as bones and muscles reconfigured themselves into wolf anatomy. A grotesque but efficient process that took only seconds. Fur sprouted from his skin, muscles bulked and reshaped, and his face elongated into a muscle as he dropped to all fours, becoming the massive, black wolf she'd only seen once before. Viktor sensed his approach and swung around, using Isabella as a shield between them. Her body dangling from his grip, like a grotesque puppet. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her oxygen-starved body. "Stay back, nephew, or I'll snap her neck before you reach us." The threat rumbled from his chest, vibrating against Isabella's back where he held her. Mikhail skidded to a halt, claws scraping against metal, his fully transformed wolf form massive and intimidating despite his injuries. Blood matted his black fur, but his eyes, still recognizably Mikhail's, even in this form, remained fixed on Isabella with agonized intensity. The intelligence behind them was unmistakably human, though the fury was all wolf. His scent changed in this form, earthier, wilder, like forests after thunderstorms. "This is between us," Mikhail growled, the words guttural but intelligible through his wolf's muzzle, sound emerging from a throat not designed for human speech. His tail was low, his ears flattened against his skull, body language that spoke volumes to another wolf, submissive yet tensed for action. "Let her go." Viktor laughed, the sound chilling in his half-transformed state, high-pitched and wrong from such a massive creature. "Everything I do is a lesson, nephew. Perhaps watching her die will finally teach you that humans are meant to be prey, not partners." His grip tightened fractionally, eliciting a strangled gasp from Isabella. Isabella's vision began to fade further, her struggles weakening as oxygen deprivation took its toll, limbs becoming leaden and unresponsive. Her right hand, still clutching the gun, hung limply at her side, fingers numb and tingling. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, a memory surfaced. The scar over Mikhail's heart that would never heal because of the silver in it. Silver that couldn't be removed because of how close it was to his heart. Mikhail had nearly died. A direct hit to the heart was almost always fatal. Drawing on strength she didn't know she had, Isabella raised the gun and pressed it directly against Viktor's chest, where she could feel his heart hammering beneath her touch. The organ pounded against her hand through fur and muscle, supernaturally strong yet vulnerable to the metal she wielded. Viktor's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in contempt. "You don't have the strength left to pull that trigger, human." His lips curled back from his fangs in a smile that had likely been the last thing many victims had seen. A death grin that had heralded centuries of violence. "Even now, you think you can win. That's what I've always found amusing about your kind. Such delusions of adequacy." Isabella's finger tightened, summoning every ounce of determination as darkness closed around her. The edges of her vision turning black, then grey, colours draining from the world. Her throat worked painfully against his grip, larynx bruising under crushing pressure, but she managed to force out words. "This ends now," she gasped through her constricted throat, each word a battle against his crushing grip, forcing air through a passage nearly closed. She fired. Even with her earbuds, the gunshot was deafening at point-blank range, the sound reverberating through her body like a physical blow. The muzzle flash illuminated Viktor's face in stark relief, transforming his expression of contempt to shock, immortalizing the moment his certainty shattered. Viktor's grip loosened instantly as the silver bullet tore into his heart, his roar of pain transforming into a wet gurgle. Isabella dropped to the catwalk, landing hard on her knees, gasping desperately for air that burned like fire down her abused throat. Her lungs heaved, drawing in great gulping breaths that sent stars dancing across her vision, each one both agony and relief. Viktor stumbled backward, clutching at his chest, where black blood now poured from the wound, smoking on contact with the air and filling the space with the stench of burning meat and sulfur. The liquid hissed as it hit the metal catwalk, eating into the surface like acid. "You," he choked, his features contorting in disbelief and agony. Blood bubbled from his mouth, dripping from elongated canines, staining them crimson. The aristocratic mask slipped entirely, leaving only the wounded animal beneath, ancient eyes showing fear perhaps for the first time in centuries. Impossible. Isabella's thoughts matched his. She had believed a point-blank shot of silver would be enough to end things, but Viktor still looked perfectly capable of tearing her apart before the silver had a chance to take him down. But before Viktor could react, Mikhail was on him, a black blur of fur and fury, moving so fast he seemed to teleport across the intervening space. Man and wolf crashed through the rusted railing, the metal giving way with a tortured shriek, tumbling toward the concrete floor far below. The impact echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap, followed by sounds of vicious combat. Snarls, tearing flesh, the crack of bones, all amplified by the cavernous space until it seemed a dozen wolves fought instead of two. Isabella dragged herself to the edge, peering down through vision still blurry from near strangulation. Vertigo momentarily making the scene below swim in and out of focus. Her throat throbbed with each heartbeat, tender flesh already swelling, making even breathing painful. Mikhail and Viktor rolled across the floor in a deadly blur of motion, claws and teeth flashing in the dim light. Dark shapes against darker shadows, defined primarily by movement and the occasional glint of eye or fang caught in moonlight. Despite his mortal wound, Viktor fought with the desperate strength of a cornered predator, landing vicious blows that tore into Mikhail's already injured body. sending tufts of black fur flying and spattering the concrete with fresh blood that appeared black in the dim light. But the silver was doing its work, spreading poison through his supernatural system. With each passing second, Viktor's movements became more sluggish, his attacks less coordinated, and his reflexes dulled as the metal disrupted the magic that sustained him. Black blood poured from his chest wound, spreading across his fur in a dark stain that seemed to absorb the moonlight itself, an emptiness spreading across his body. Mikhail didn't relent, driving his uncle back with relentless attacks, jaws snapping, claws slashing. Even wounded, he moved with a fluid grace that Viktor, now stumbling and disoriented, couldn't match. The younger wolf circled his failing opponent, each attack precise and calculated, wearing him down methodically. The end came suddenly. Viktor attempted to lunge at Mikhail's exposed flank, but faltered as the silver poison reached its full effect, his legs giving way mid-leap. Mikhail sidestepped the clumsy attack with contemptuous ease and struck with lethal precision, powerful jaws closing around Viktor's throat in a killing grip, perfected through millennia of evolution. One savage twist, and it was done. The sound of vertebrae separating was audible even from Isabella's position above, a wet crack that echoed with grim finality. Viktor's body collapsed to the concrete, transforming in death back to his human form, an aging man with aristocratic features, his expression frozen in surprise. In death, the family resemblance to Mikhail was more apparent. The same high cheekbones and strong jaw, though Viktor's face was lined with centuries Isabella could only imagine. His naked body seemed smaller, diminished somehow, mortal remains that belied the monster he had been moments before. Isabella slumped against the remaining railing, the cool metal a relief against her fevered skin. The gun slipped from her bloodied fingers, clattering to the catwalk with a metallic ring that echoed in the sudden silence. Her throat throbbed painfully with each breath, and the claw wounds on her arm burned like fire, warm blood still seeping through torn fabric. She raised tentative fingers to her neck, feeling the bruises already forming in the shape of Viktor's massive hand, skin tender and swollen beneath her touch. Below, Mikhail stood over his uncle's body, his massive wolf form heaving with exertion. Blood dripped from his muscle in steady drops, pattering on the concrete like crimson rain. Still, his stance had no triumph, only exhaustion and a kind of weary resolution, as if a burden carried for centuries had finally been set down. Slowly, painfully, his transformation reversed, fur receding, limbs realigning with audible cracks and pops, until the man stood where the wolf had been, naked, wounded, but victorious. Their eyes met across the distance, blue human eyes meeting dark brown ones. In that moment of connection, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that neither would have survived alone, that together they had done what neither could accomplish individually. Then Mikhail's legs buckled, and he collapsed beside his uncle's body, falling to the concrete with a thud that echoed through the chamber. "Mikhail!" Isabella screamed, her voice a broken rasp that barely carried. Pain flared in her throat with the effort, but panic overrode discomfort. Ignoring her injuries, she scrambled toward the ladder, nearly tumbling down it in her haste to reach the ground floor. The main floor was a battlefield of broken equipment, shattered glass, and bodies, Viktor's mercenaries, who had fallen to Mikhail or his pack members outside. The smell was overwhelming. Blood, gunpowder, the acrid scent of fear sweat, and beneath it all, the distinctive musk of werewolf. Isabella navigated through the wreckage, focused only on reaching Mikhail's crumpled form. She stumbled once, catching herself on a twisted piece of metal, leaving a bloody handprint behind like a macabre signpost. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the pain that shot through her injured ribs at the motion, hands hovering uncertainly over his blood-slick body. Multiple deep lacerations crossed his chest and back, and his left arm lay at an angle that made her stomach lurch, despite its partial healing during his transformation. The smooth planes of his face were almost unrecognizable beneath layers of blood and grime. Yet somehow, he was more vulnerable in unconsciousness than she'd ever seen him. Centuries of guardedness stripped away. "Mikhail," she whispered, gently turning his face toward her, his skin clammy and cool beneath her fingertips. Her thumb brushed away a smear of blood from his cheekbone, revealing the pale skin beneath. His eyes were closed, skin ashen, beneath smears of blood. For one terrible moment, she feared she was too late, that Viktor had taken Mikhail with him in death. Then his chest rose with a shallow breath, and his eyelids fluttered, dark lashes stark against pale cheeks. "Isabella," he murmured, voice barely audible, a mere whisper of sound. His hand moved slightly, searching for hers, fingers twitching weakly against the concrete. "You're alive." "Thanks to you," she said, relieved tears threatening, despite her efforts to remain calm. She hadn't cried since her mother's funeral, had built walls around her emotions so high that colleagues called her heartless. Yet now those walls crumbled at the sight of him, broken but breathing. "Don't try to move. Help is coming." She wasn't sure if that was true, but the need to comfort outweighed strict accuracy. His hand found hers, fingers weakly intertwining, cold against her warmth. His touch, usually so confident and sure, was now fragile as bird bones. "Viktor." "Dead," she confirmed, glancing at the still form nearby. Strange to see the monster who had terrorized them, reduced to an aging human corpse. "You killed him. It's over." The words seemed inadequate for the end of a centuries-old power struggle, for the death of a creature who had walked through history. A ghost of a smile touched his bloodied lips, cracking their dryness, a fresh trickle of red appearing at the corner of his mouth. "We killed him. Your silver bullet. My teeth. Good partnership." The phrase held a weight beyond its simple meaning. An acknowledgement that they had each brought their own strengths to a battle neither could have won alone. Human ingenuity and lichen strength combined. Isabella carefully lifted his head onto her lap, brushing matted hair from his forehead with a tenderness she hadn't known she possessed, fingers gentle against his battered skin. "Stay with me," she urged, noting with alarm how cold his skin felt, a chill that seemed to be spreading outward from the core of him. "The pack will be here soon." As if summoned by her words, approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber, multiple sets moving in coordinated rhythm. Isabella tensed, raising her head to see shadowy figures moving through the entrance. But these moved with the fluid grace she'd come to recognize in werewolves. This distinctive rolling gait suggested barely restrained power. "Here!" she called, her damaged throat limiting her volume, the word emerging as little more than a hoarse croak. "Quickly!" Katerina was the first to reach them, emerging from the shadows like a manifestation of darkness. Her usual stoic expression cracked at the sight of her grievously wounded alpha, and her dark eyes widened momentarily before control reasserted itself. Behind her came 4 more pack members, all shifting from partial wolf forms back to human as they approached. Bones cracked and reforming beneath skin with wet organic sounds. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, a rainbow of amber, gold, and blue that would have terrified Isabella just weeks ago, but now represented salvation. "Damon?" Isabella asked, as they knelt beside Mikhail, forming a protective circle around their fallen alpha. Her hand remained clutched in his, unwilling to break the connection that seemed to keep him tethered to consciousness. "Safe," Katerina confirmed, her clipped tone softening slightly, Russian accent more pronounced under stress. "One of our healers is attending to him outside." Her sharp eyes assessed Mikhail's condition with military precision, taking inventory of each wound with clinical detachment that couldn't quite hide her concern. "The alpha needs blood. And silver antidote." 2 of the pack members immediately produced emergency medical supplies from backpacks, working with a practiced efficiency that spoke of frequent field treatments. One, a young woman with intricate tattoos winding up her arms, symbols Isabella didn't recognize, began cleaning the worst of Mikhail's wounds while murmuring what sounded like ancient incantations, words in no language Isabella had ever heard, flowing and guttural simultaneously. Another prepared injections of a luminescent blue liquid that Isabella recognized as the silver antidote she'd seen at the pack's headquarters. The fluid glowing faintly, as if possessing its own internal light source. Katerina turned to Isabella, noting the wounds on her arm, and the bruising already forming around her throat, dark purple marks in the shape of a massive hand. The enforcer's nostrils flared slightly, scenting the extent of Isabella's injuries in a way that still felt invasive. An animal assessment that bypassed human privacy. "You need treatment too," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Her expression remained impassive, but something like respect glinted in her eyes, a newfound regard that hadn't existed before. Isabella shook her head, ignoring how the motion made the room spin momentarily. "Take care of him first." She used the same authoritative tone that had silenced challenging defense attorneys, and to her surprise, Katerina nodded acceptance. Something like respect flickered in Katerina's eyes, a subtle shift in her usual cold assessment. "You fought well, human. Viktor was no easy opponent." The words were delivered deadpan, but carried the weight of high praise. "Well, neither am I," Isabella replied, her voice hoarse but determined. A commotion from the entrance drew their attention, a clatter of equipment and the disciplined murmur of coordinated movement. More figures approached, human shapes this time, moving with the disciplined formation of tactical police units, flashlight beams sweeping methodically across the scene. The white light created harsh shadows and glinted off weapons held at the ready. "Police!" a voice shouted, authoritative yet tensed with uncertainty. "Nobody move!" A detective emerged from the darkness, gun raised, followed by a tactical team in body armor. His weathered face showed the strain of recent days, the circles under his eyes speaking of sleepless nights, skin grey with exhaustion beneath the tactical light mounted on his weapon. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. The dead body of Viktor Aldridge, the wounded Mikhail surrounded by his pack, Isabella bloodied but defiant. Holy shit, the detective breathed, lowering his weapon slightly. His badge read Turner. Isabella didn't know him well, but knew he was a friend of Harper's and a clean cop. His professional demeanor cracked momentarily, revealing genuine shock beneath the cop facade. Dia Santos, what the hell happened here? Isabella glanced at Katerina, a silent question in her eyes. How much could she reveal? Where was the line between necessary explanation and dangerous truth? The enforcer gave an almost imperceptible nod. Permission to speak, but carefully. Acknowledgement that some version of events must be provided. Viktor Aldrich, Isabella said, gesturing toward the corpse with her free hand, the other still entwined with Mikhail's. Her courtroom voice returned automatically, clear, factual, carefully edited despite the rasp of injury. The killer we've been hunting. He took Assistant D.A. Montgomery hostage to lure us here. Things got complicated. An understatement so profound it bordered on absurdity, yet accurate in its way. Turner's gaze traveled from Viktor's body to Mikhail. The detective's eyes narrowed slightly. Isabella was sure he sensed there was more to a story than he was being told. The look that had preceded many of his most impressive arrests. And him? Viktor's nephew, Isabella explained, keeping her account as close to the truth as possible while omitting supernatural elements. He helped me find Viktor. As you can see, it didn't go smoothly. She maintained eye contact, using the same forthright gaze that had convinced juries of her honesty, while carefully omitting details that would shatter worldviews. Turner holstered his weapon, signaling the tactical team to stand down. The officers lowered their weapons, but remained alert, eyes constantly scanning the scene with professional paranoia. That's putting it mildly. He stepped closer, crouching to examine Viktor's body with an experienced eye, the detached assessment of someone who had seen too many violent deaths to be shocked anymore. Throat torn out, just like the victims. He looked up at Isabella, his gaze shrewd and speculative, the intelligence that made him Atlanta's best homicide detective fully engaged. Care to explain that? Before she could answer, Mikhail stirred, his eyes opening with effort, blue irises foggy with pain, his mind present despite his injuries. Self-defense, he managed, voice weak but clear, carrying the subtle authority that made others listen even in whispers. Despite his injuries, blood loss, and prone position, something in his tone commanded attention. He had accomplices, animals, trained attack dogs. When I tried to save Miss Santos, one of them turned on him instead. Turner's expression made it clear he didn't entirely believe this explanation. Skepticism written in the furrow between his brows and the tightness around his eyes. But something in his gaze suggested he wasn't ready to hear the whole truth either. A willful blind spot preserved by a mind not prepared to rewrite its understanding of reality. The detective had spent decades in law enforcement. He recognized that pursuing specific questions might lead to answers he wasn't prepared to accept. These truths would unravel everything he thought he knew. We need to get him to a hospital, Isabella said, deliberately changing the subject and steering the conversation toward practical concerns. She used her technique of redirecting focus when a line of questioning threatened uncomfortable revelations. And Damon, too. The mention of her injured assistant reminded her of her own pain, previously dulled by adrenaline, but now returning in waves. Ambulances are outside, Turner confirmed, standing. This place is now a crime scene. Everyone gets checked out. Then I want statements. His gaze lingered on Mikhail's unusual wounds. The black residue around Viktor's chest wound. The strange composition of the blood that seemed to eat into concrete where it fell. Complete statements. Katerina stepped forward, somehow looking authoritative despite being covered in blood. She stood with military precision, her movements suggesting training far beyond civilian experience. Back straight and shoulders squared despite recent combat. Detective, my employer requires specialized medical care. Our private medical team is already en route. Your employer? Harper questioned, eyebrow raised, the gesture drawing attention to the scar that bisected it. Volkov Holdings has certain protocols for emergencies involving the family, Katerina explained smoothly. Her accent became slightly more pronounced. A tactical shift Isabella had noticed when the enforcer wanted to seem less threatening to humans, leaning into the foreign element to create distance. Given Mr. Volkov's high profile, we prefer to handle matters discreetly. I'm sure you understand the sensitive nature of his position. Turner looked like he wanted to argue, jaw tightening momentarily, but years of dealing with Atlanta's elite had taught him when to push and when to yield, at least temporarily. The pragmatism of a career detective, recognizing that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when the opponent had resources that dwarfed the police departments. Fine, but I'll need access to medical reports, and everyone else gives statements before leaving the scene. He gestured to his team to secure the perimeter, and officers immediately moved to establish order in chaos. As the tactical team secured the area and the pack prepared to move, Mikhail and Isabella remained by his side. Her hand was still clasped in his, and their blood mingled where palms were pressed. The simple contact seemed vitally important, a physical anchor in the aftermath of violence. "Did you mean it?" she whispered, for his ears alone, leaning close enough that her lips nearly brushed his ear, her hair falling forward to create a curtain of privacy. "When you said you didn't know if what you felt was love?" Mikhail's eyes, pained but lucid, found hers through the veil of her dark hair. The intensity in them hadn't diminished despite his injuries. That unnerving focus that had first drawn her to him still burning through pain and exhaustion. "I meant that human words seem inadequate." His voice was barely a whisper, yet it held a certainty she'd never heard from him before. Absolute conviction beneath the weakness. "What I feel for you goes deeper than love. It's in my blood, my bones." Despite his condition, his fingers tightened weakly around hers, the grip still stronger than a normal human's. "You saw me, the real me, and you didn't run." "I told you," Isabella replied, her throat tight with emotion, words emerging thick with feelings she'd denied herself for years. "I don't run. From anything." Medical technicians approached with a stretcher, interrupting the moment with the practical necessities of survival. As they carefully transferred Mikhail, Isabella rose on unsteady feet, the world tilting momentarily before stabilizing. Katerina appeared at her side, offering silent support. As she followed the stretcher bearing Mikhail toward the exit, Isabella caught her reflection in a shard of broken glass. Blood streaked her face in macabre patterns. Her clothes were torn and stained, and her eyes held a new awareness. Harder, sharper, but also more certain. Turner fell into step beside her as they neared the exit, walking through alternating patches of shadow and newborn sunlight. "You know," he said conversationally, though his eyes were sharp with unasked questions. When this is all sorted out, we're going to talk long about what happened here. Isabella met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, despite knowing that her eyes might reveal more than her words. Yes, she agreed. But I'm not sure you're ready for that conversation, Detective. Turner studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement without acceptance. Maybe not today, but soon. He glanced ahead at Mikhail, loaded into a private ambulance and surrounded by protective pack members who positioned themselves like bodyguards between their alpha and potential threats. He's not what he seems, is he? Isabella followed his gaze, watching as Katerina insisted on riding with her alpha. Her posture was alert despite the night's exhaustion, and her eyes were constantly scanning for danger. The enforcer's hand never strayed far from her tactical belt, ready to defend her alpha even against medical personnel, if necessary. Loyalty, transcending normal human boundaries. None of us is exactly what we seem, Detective, she replied. Some of us just hide it better than others. She offered him her best enigmatic smile.